Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual business case slash panel discussion hosted by Industry IoT in association with Tulip, the leader in frontline operations technology, and Dow, the global chemical manufacturer. Now, my name is Daniel Phillips, CEO here at Industry IoT, and I will be your host, joining you live from our offices here in London. Now, as you can see, the overarching theme of the discussion today is from average to exceptional, and how manufacturers can achieve operational excellence and agility in weeks, not months. And we plan to delve into two areas. The first being digital implementation challenges. So why do these projects fail? And what's likely missing in the planning process. The second topic being embracing digital and recommendations for manufacturers, a discussion with multiple perspectives and how to effectively implement digital tools into your manufacturing operations. So joining me today will be Erik Mirandette, who leads product and ecosystem at Tulip, the leader in frontline operations technology, spun out of MIT. Erik has 16 plus years experience in building and leading teams in operations and product development. And alongside Erik will be Doug McKnight. Doug leads digital manufacturing implementation across Europe for Dow. And Doug's background is in leading teams in process industry operations, SHE and supply chain for 25 years, and is based out of Germany. Now, the interesting thing is that Erik comes from a discrete manufacturing background, Doug from the process industry, and that interplay brings up some very interesting differences from which I'm sure we will all learn a thing or two. Now, before we get started, I'll quickly go over some general housekeeping and we can begin. Down the right-hand side of your screen, there is a live chat room. So feel free to say hello and introduce yourself to the other attendees. There is also a tab at the bottom of your screen that says Ask a Question. So if you have any questions for our guest speakers throughout, feel free to drop them there and we will get through as many of them as we can during the Q&A. So that's it from me. Let me bring our guest speakers up into the stream and we can begin. Erik, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. And Doug, welcome. How you doing?
Very good. Thanks, Dan. And as always, a pleasure to participate in these conversations sponsored by Industry IoT. So thank you. And I look forward to a great chat.
Well, it's great to have you both here. So let's get straight into it. We kind of want to cover two areas. The first being digital implementation challenges. So I want to first drill down into sort of digital tool and technology implementation. So Doug, what has this looked like at Dow and generally in your experience working in manufacturing?
So I think there's a number of sort of top to bottom, let's say, bullet points here to talk through. At the top level, certainly for the process industries, we've got to figure out what are the relevant solutions for our industry. A little bit different just because of the nature of the industry. Things like robotics, we don't use for the robotic arm for manufacturing operations themselves, but we tend to use robotics for things like vessel inspection, so much more crawlers and drones and that sort of stuff. Things like AI is very relevant to us because we, as an industry, have traditionally invested heavily in automation in terms of process control and data backgrounds. And bringing those things together and understand what's relevant for our industry is very important. We also have a vast breadth from small batch plants, which are very discrete in nature, making discrete batches of high value, small volume products, all the way through to very large processes like crackers. What we do see then, the next sort of point to talk there is value case. Understanding the big picture of how all of those possible digital IT and OT solutions can come together is not linear. and the exercise of trying to justify, project by project to say, okay, this is going to cost us X $1,000 and it's going to give us a return of investment. Jigsaw piece by jigsaw piece doesn't always work, because some of those things are infrastructure by nature and need to be done to get to the overall big picture. That in and of itself is difficult to sell internally, because we're used to investing in projects step by step. Therefore, the next level down, if you like, is sponsorship and strategy. It is vital to have clear sponsorship in the organization that sets the tone, sets the expectations, and maintains momentum towards that goal. And also vital to have clear strategy. By strategy, I mean that you got to have a plan of what it's got to look like in the end. If you get a strategy that's too detailed, you really are focusing on tools. And if you get a strategy that's not detailed enough, it's too ambiguous, you're not really understanding the user requirements that you need as an organization. So having the right level of strategy is important. And we're talking implementation. So once you get past all of that into the weeds, you get down to pipeline management, fail fast. And then once you've selected the solutions that are relevant to you, scale them effectively. And then once you're implementing, change management and making sure that you bring the whole organization with you on that change management journey, because that's a people by people, person by person process.
Yeah, that's interesting. Erik, maybe a slightly different perspective to Doug from your experience, but what has this looked like from your point of view?
Yeah, well, Doug, I think Doug covered a lot of ground here, and I agree, I think, with many of the points that he's making. A couple that I would emphasize. The first is that when you think about digital transformation and implementing digital tools to solve real world use cases, there's no one company, product, or service that is going to be the cure-all to all of these problems. So I think you're necessarily thinking about what's the architecture upon which I'm going to be building these solutions, and there's different stacks, different tools that solve different problems and have different roles to play there. And so I think one of the prerequisites to doing this well is that when you are making these early decisions here, that you have a prerequisite of whatever you're going to implement needs to be built upon an open architecture, which is to say that you need to be able to transact data freely across whatever tools you're going to be implementing. And I think that's one key prerequisite to success. The second is, I think it's pretty important, when you're implementing these tools, you don't, Doug, you mentioned you want to have the right strategy. It's like this one's too detailed, this one's not detailed enough. You kind of want to find that balance there. I would say that strategy often, that's important for the strategy. I would say when it comes to the actual implementation of this, you're not going to know the end state up front. There's a lot of unknowns that you're going to be encountering, a lot of problems that you're going to be solving for as you execute this strategy. And so making sure that you're providing space for the unknown, and that you aren't trying to boil the ocean all at once, but you're actually focusing in on what are the key problems we want to solve first. Let's not overcomplexify these problems. Let's get in, create real value quick, and then we can continue to iterate on top of that is quite important. And then the last point that I would really want to emphasize here is that it is essential that you take the frontline workforce as a core part of this problem solving exercise, not just saying, what are my user requirements kind of at the highest level as translated by an IT organization or a third party, system integrator or something like this, but really involve them as key stakeholders. They're the ones who know where the problems are, and they often have great ideas for how these problems can be best solved. In fact, just on LinkedIn this morning, I saw there's a thread going viral, and I think it's a page out of the new Elon Musk biography that Walter Isaacson recently published, and it's basically it's like Elon Musk. It's the page where he says, it's not just the great product; it's the machine that enables you to create these great products that is so important. And it's this key insight where, for the first time, He's basically saying the people who are on the shop floor, the ability to get their input is important. And then that got pushed by Rick Bellotta, and it got further amplified by Walker Reynolds, and it's currently echoing through LinkedIn right now. But it hits on a key point, which is to say, if you have the perfect digital strategy and it's going to solve all of your company's problems, and you've got an open architecture, and you haven't yet taken that to the shop floor and actually talk to people who are doing the work, you're dead in the water. Don't even start.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Some great insights to kick off the discussion. I'd like to maybe do a little deep dive into digital implementation challenges. So coming back to you, Erik, what challenges do manufacturers experience when implementing the digital tools?
Yeah, well, I think the first common pitfall that I see time and time again is a desire to we're engineers, and when you give us tools, we like to solve hard problems, and we like to solve them in all of the edge cases before we get out of the gate. And I would say this is one of those areas where you kind of really need to resist that draw. The agile approach to problem solving here is key. Let's understand what's the simplest, quickest problem that we can get an MVP out to the shop floor, pressure test this, and then take that agile approach to problem solving is really, really key. I think, the biggest problem that I typically see, or the biggest pitfall that I'll see folks step into, is say, we're going to build the whole thing and then we're going to roll it out all at once, and we're going to just hope that things go well. They very seldom do. So that iterative approach to problem solving here, I think, is the key to success.
And from your side, Doug, I mean, what has been effective in your projects to address some of these implementation challenges?
I guess I'm going to come back to what Erik said there about involving the shop floor. I totally agree with that, and I covered that into the change management aspect of what I was talking about. In order to bring effective change into a manufacturing environment, you have to bring those people. You have to bring our operations teams and our operators in the plant to a new place and a new way of working. And that's part of that change management journey, to build awareness of the case for change and eventually desire for the case for change into the organization. And that's really important. So I totally agree with that. You got to ensure that those people are part of that journey. And part of that is also to making sure that it's easy to use. I like Erik's comment on open architecture. Having tools that all fitted together would be really good. Our experience and observation has been that that is not the case. It really is not the case, especially when you're looking for solutions that are made for industry instead of consumer goods. You're looking for hardware that is hazardous area classified material. And we're trying to create architectures that communicate between heritage process control systems, new digital tools, potentially mobile tools in the field with different operating systems, and other hardware items that want to interact into that. Totally critical to that. For those people in the field who are busy people and working to operate our assets, it's not easy to change the wheels of the car while you're driving along. And so helping them to do something that's easy and gives them immediate benefit it is opening the door to effective implementation. So I totally agree with that, and I think that that's the right way to go. However, and this harks a little bit back also to strategy. Setting sail into the great blue yonder needs a little bit of a map, and iterating and accepting that strategy has to pivot is one thing, and they do. But having a good map of roughly where you want to get to, on what's valuable for the organization is important. That enables what I call the triple benefit case, which is what's the value for the corporation in terms of profitability, productivity, safety, etc., cost saving. What's the benefit typically for the person who's paying the bill? And that's, in our case, often a production leader who runs a facility and has a budget to manage. And what's the benefit case for the individual who's going to use that tool and it's going to make their jobs easier? That triple benefit case is kind of important. And I think the last thing I wanted to touch on, and it really comes back to those users again, is this idea of the pit crew. Time and time again, we see that busy people and getting them to change the way that they work and do something new, particularly whenever you're talking about operating discipline in plants, needs a sort of pit crew type approach. You have to bring a way that they can very quickly change the wheels and move on, get the necessary information, and then support them as they get up to speed with it. Support them, and then the aspect of iterative improvement, iterative optimization, and agile improvement forward gets into effect. Those are things that I think for us have been critical. So making it easy, making it a low barrier to entry, understanding the benefit case for the different levels of the organization, and supporting implementation with the pit crew to make sure that it gets up and running, and then it's good to go and support from there.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that, I think so. First of all, I think I agree with many of these points. The first point that I want to emphasize is like when you're talking about engaging the stakeholders, the shop floor, and bringing them along for the ride, this change management aspect, it's really important to understand that you're gonna these shop floor people, the people who are doing the work day to day that I'm saying are so important. It's also important to understand that these folks they're probably pretty skeptical. They've probably been burned once or twice. They're probably going to roll their eyes and say, "Oh boy, here we go again," because they probably had a lot of these failed initiatives pushed on them once, twice, 3 times before, and so it's important. Like it really is important to emphasize, to Doug's point. This isn't, we're just going to start throwing mud at the wall and see what sticks. We do have a strategy. We know where we're going, I like the analogy of setting sail and, into the great blue without having any map. That's like it's not a boat I would get on. Right. So knowing where you're going is quite important. I think, the key here is how you go about executing and implementing that. And, obviously Tulip is a no code, low code platform, but it's specifically I guess begs the question, why? And the reason that we're a no-code platform is so that operations can very quickly iterate on this and incorporate feedback directly from the shop floor operation. And I'll never forget, it happens every time we engage with a customer. We'll say, hey, frontline workforce, here's the plan, and they should roll their eyes and say, like, does this work for you? Does this solve your problems? And they'll say, no, it doesn't solve my problems. This should be here, and this doesn't make any sense. But then the engineer responsible for this will make those changes real time. And when they see that this is really a tool that's designed to help enable their workflow, that's when you get this light bulb moment and you get the buy-in. And that's when the real change can start to happen.
Great. I love the pit crew analogy, Doug, as well. Interesting. I have a question, and this comes up time and time again when we speak to the members of our community and when we're a part of these events, but stalling digital transformation projects. So why do digital implementation projects get stalled or fail in manufacturing? Doug, give us your take, and Erik, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts as well.
So we're talking a lot about strategies today. I'm going to come back to strategy. Just an analogy, because I love the little story. I read this from a sort of leadership book at one point, to say, would you get on the ship with the captain who was determined to go from A to B, and that far port on the horizon? They plotted their path and they were going to follow that route in and out of the islands and past the rocks, come hell or high water. Or would you get on the ship with the captain who knew where they wanted to go, but were flexible as to what the route had to be because there might be a storm, or there might be an island in the way, or there might be other traffic in the way, and would therefore adapt accordingly. So I think that a well-communicated and flexible, but well-understood plan of action is important. Why I keep banging on about that? Why is it important? Because it helps align people. And we see that so many times that without alignment, then people can kind of make up their own mind as to what the right answer is. But if you have a source of truth that aligns the arrows in the same direction, then that enables progress. What happens when you don't have that? Often what we see is the death by SME, when you've got all sorts of people who have their opinions and have their their desire to stall things or approve things or not approve things, as the case may be. And that's probably the single biggest issue that we face, is getting past that phase of approval and alignment. And one of the things that happens often enough that we see is, if you have 3 or 4 different options of a tool to use, look at the marketplace, you do your POCs, you select out what are the best tools to go pilot. If somebody within the organization has real ownership of the best tool, they will drive that, and they'll drive it relentlessly through the organization, even if that's not necessarily the best choice for a global company in multiple different regions of the world. So that alignment is really really important. And then once you get into that sort of change management mode of implementation, ensuring that there's responsiveness to those resource needs for adoption is important. That comes back to that pit crew. Often the resistance management aspect of change management is identifying what's going wrong here. It can be a technology issue, or it can be a people issue. Often, I would say 80-20. It's more 80-20% of the time a people issue, where you got to go have a conversation with somebody or get some more resource hands to make it go faster, or get some more money, or get things aligned in the right way to make it go forward. So, those sorts of things are the things that we see happening in the organization that stall it, and knocking those out of the way and keeping things moving forward is how to unstall it and move it forward.
Thank you, Doug. Erik, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I think I'll take it in a little bit different direction. If you think about how these types of digital systems have been implemented in the past, I've never spoken to anyone who's in the middle of implementing their ERP and they say, "Hey, we're ahead of schedule, under budget, things are going great, team's on fire." I've never heard that in my life. Similarly, if you think about an MES implementation, what does this look like? You start by defining the user requirements, then you're going to go ahead and you're going to put out an RFP, you're going to get a bunch of bids from vendors, you're going to select a vendor, then you're going to set to work architecting the data architecture on the back end. This is going to be a monolithic and rigid data architecture. Like, once it's done, it's done. You don't want to change it. If you do want to change it, it's going to be a pretty expensive undertaking. It's going to take a lot of time, and it's likely going to require third-party system integrator or extensive involvement from IT. You're then going to go ahead and you're going to put a front end on top of that, and you're going to say, okay, we had 427 user requirements, and here is a system that solves all of those user requirements. By this time, 18 months have gone by, 24 months have gone by. And so when you talk about stalled implementations, I think that 18 months is probably a big part of that. But then you're going to get to the end state of this, and you're going to have a big bang. You're going to turn this thing on overnight, and everything is going to go swimmingly. Everything is going to go great. All the problems have been solved. But there's a couple of problems. The first problem is that those 427 user requirements didn't actually capture the reality of the shop, of like how the operation worked. They were, these are complex environments, and no one person really understands the whole of that system at any given point in time. And so those requirements are almost always a little bit off. And then the other problem is, 12, 18 months have gone by. And guess what? These are dynamic environments. Things change. You have new equipment, product line A sells, product line B doesn't sell. You're going to change your production accordingly. You've got workforce turnover, so on and so forth. You've made other buy versus build decisions, whereas previously some of these components were purchased, maybe now they're manufactured in-house. My point is these are dynamic environments, which means that in the interim, things happen. And even if that system was built perfectly for the problems that you faced 12, 18 months ago, they're no longer well suited to address the problems that you're facing today. And I think that this method of implementation for these digital systems is oftentimes the reason that they are stalled, over budget, under deliver, kind of underwhelm. And I would contrast that with this agile approach to problem solving, which is, the title of this webinar, weeks, not months, right? So, how can you find what are technologies that allow you to get in, identify core problems, solve those problems very, very quickly? I would say getting a prototype out there within a couple of days as opposed to a couple of months, and then iterating on that feedback very quickly, and then adding to that as you go, making sure you're taking on the right problems at the right time in an agile implementation. And I think that these two contrasting approaches to digital system implementation are the leading causes for what you typically see as delays in stalled, or what McKinsey will call POV purgatory.
Yeah. I'd like to respond to that, Dan, if I may. I think that I agree with Erik. The let's say the good old days, if you like, of ERP systems, waterfall project implementation, as Erik described, are indeed behind us. I think we also observe that we are working in an agile way, and bringing together those different aspects that are OT, IT, architecture, mobile devices, the deployment of AI, many different things that come together. And as you rightly say, Erik, I mean, bringing together a POC level trial to feel fast and understand where the value case is, and then building those things together into the big picture. I think that is the way forward in terms of implementing the overall sort of digital transformation, certainly within our industry. That's what we see too.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to shift into kind of the second part and discuss some of the key insights into effectively implementing digital tools in your manufacturing operations. And Erik, I'd like to start with a question for you around playbooks for successful digital implementation. What does successful solution implementation look like?
Yeah, I think, I have a world belief which states that, like a worldview that states that the people who are closest to the problems are oftentimes, most of the time, best suited to solve those problems. And so for me, the translation of this is, how do you empower citizen development within a composable framework that allows you to implement these solutions in an agile fashion within the appropriate governance and framework that is informed by the correct digital strategy, right? So it's you set alignment on where you're going and why you're going there and the value of the business, and you make sure that there is consensus among all the budget owners and the relevant stakeholders across IT, OT, where I think the line is increasingly becoming a bit blurry, frankly. But the people who are needed to make this a successful implementation have buy-in up front. That's critical. And then I think the question becomes, how do you empower those folks who are closest to the shop floor to solve these problems? In our world, this means providing the frontline engineers with a no-code platform that allows them to build applications very quickly that address these challenges, that get and I love Doug's analogy of the pit crew, but this is the analogy here is getting the information to the right people at the right time so they can make the right decision. And then also capturing that feedback so you can incorporate that into your problem solving technique. And again, enabling the parallelization of this problem solving by empowering those frontline engineers with a fundamentally better class of tools. So I think these are the core themes to getting this right.
And Doug, I'd like to ask you the exact same question, if you don't mind.
Sure, you can ask me whatever you want. I think I'm not going to reiterate some of the good words that Erik said, but I agree with booking the gains. If you want to create momentum within an organization, you got to book the gains and show value. And remember, that's the triple value case, not just one way. Change management is all about person by person, creating awareness within the organization and therefore the desire for change. I think that, and Erik alluded to it, if you get to the point where the organization is ready for change and says, okay, it's about time now. We are good to go. It's about time to roll this thing out. And then you're good to go. But the amount of communication up front to make sure that people are aware of what's coming. And I'm kind of speaking here project by project and cumulatively building those into the big picture. Digital transformation for the entire company is building a global jigsaw of solutions. But those individual solutions by solutions, as Erik said, getting the gains and showing people the value and getting people to the point that they say, oh yeah, we've been waiting for this because we heard about it from the other plant in the same business and we're ready for this. So bring on the momentum. Brings really successful implementations. If you're pushing it down their throat, then it's tough. If they're waiting for it to come, then you're much more pushing on an open door, and that's all about awareness and communication.
Yeah, and Dan, if I could just, I think it's really important. So, Doug and I are, it's like we're fairly well aligned on most of these points, it sounds like, but it's also important to keep in mind that when we're translating these concepts into a mental model for the types of environments in which these solutions are being employed, we have very different ideas about the places that these are going to be deployed into. So, when I'm thinking about this, and you mentioned in the intro that I'm thinking about this largely in the context of discrete assembly operation that is, a combination of oftentimes machine, automated, and manual workflows. But I've got a very human-centric perspective when I'm thinking about how these solutions need to be deployed. What I'm not, and Doug, I'm just curious to hear your position, because I'm actually kind of surprised to hear how well aligned our positions are, because you're thinking about this in the context of you've got this massive piece of equipment that is largely automated that needs to be controlled down to to the millisecond points where there's minimal room for error, and yet it's so in this context, perhaps this adaptive problem solving, this incremental approach would seem to me at least a little bit less well suited. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective. Do you think about this differently if you're thinking about a largely automated line versus one that combines automated and manual operations?
Hey, Doug, can you hear us? I think he may have lost signal a little bit.
I can.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Doug,
I'm not
sorry.
sure whether that was me or you guys.
Yeah, so the question was briefly just, I think it's worth pointing out that, we're thinking about different types of environments here, and I'm just curious how these principles apply in a largely automated environment where there's minimal human intervention in certain processes versus a largely human or manual operation, which is more of the mental model that I'm representing when I talk about how these solutions be implemented. I'm honestly just curious, because we agree And I frankly, more than I would expect, to be honest.
I think, yeah, I think it's a great point. If I draw the analogy down to, let's say, the smallest level of a high value, low volume batch plant where we have a lot of different product streams, and you know, operators are on a daily basis involved in bringing together the raw materials, making the recipe, bringing that batch together and whatever processing steps needs to happen, and perhaps operating a packaging machine or whatever, then that requires certain types of solutions. May involve mobile devices in order to be able to see process control, or to see even interface into SAP or digital procedures, and rounds and checklists and stuff in the field. If you go to the other end of the scale, where we're talking about world scale crackers, which are very large, highly automated single product stream plants, then you may be talking about very different solutions for executing daily maintenance or process rounds, or even potentially automating or robotizing activities in some of the plants. So different solutions depending on the type of technology. But I do think that the people change, the mental people change from this is the way that I work today, to seeing a possible solution brought to them and adopting to that solution as a desire to do that thing, and then eventually doing it and getting to the point that they can use that new solution to work in a different way. That mental process is relevant whether it's an operator who's manually involved in physically operating a plant and making product with their hands, so to speak, or an operator who is much more involved in supervising a large volume, highly automated plant.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that what that underscores then is the need for the interoperability, the open architecture, the freedom of to share information across these different systems, because they all interrelate, it sounds like.
Yeah, they do. And being able to have that information available at different to different users, different levels, you know, whether that's the run plant engineer or the production leader or the business manufacturing leader in different dimensions and different scales. That information is very important and valuable. And I think that we see industries getting closer and closer to understanding how to bring all of that data together. But, you know, we have, I guess, around the world, millions, if not tens of millions, of I/O data points from process control systems. And those things are updated on a continuous basis in milliseconds, bringing all of that data into one ginormous, you know, data architecture and infrastructure. I suppose technically it's possible if you had enough servers to keep it all in one place, but there's no need to do that. So so there's still a, you know, a development and an understanding to come together as to what that architecture is going to look like.
Yeah.
I'd like to, and this is a big conversation actually, but sort of the differences in the manufacturing industry today compared to many moons ago. But Doug, what do you think? I know you've been heavily involved in Industry 4.0 transformation with Dow. What could happen if you do not embrace digital tools?
So we're, as you rightly said, Dan, Industry 4.0. And the 4.0 refers to this digitalization of the overall work process of industry. The first three got us to different plateaus, you know, of the invention of steam and electricity and automation, got us to places where we could do things differently, right? And actually, my initial training was as a process control engineer, and I was involved a long time ago, let's leave it at that, in implementing process control solutions and digital control systems in chemical plants. And at that time, selling the implementation of a DCS to the management team and what the required investment was and what the return on investment was a real tough sell. 20 years later, the thought, concept of having a world-scale chemical plant without a DCS is just not possible. And we all know the benefit that automation brings. 4.0 is kind of at that same place, that we understand the future. We as consumers, and therefore our customers and the supply chains upstream of us, are increasingly requiring us to interact digitally. That need for competitivity within the industry is driving us to be more productive with our assets and more flexible and agile with our assets. And another one that is near and dear to my heart is safety within our high hazard environment. In the past decades, we moved from injury rates in the multiple digits per million man hours to tenths of digits per million man hours. And Dow, I think it's safe to say that Dow is one of the safest companies in industry, and we pride ourselves in that. But we're constantly looking to say, okay, how do we get to the next level of safety? Relying on paper procedures has gotten us so far. But I think that that's also a space where digital is going to play the next role in taking us to a new space. And you know, in the recent years, we've had COVID came to us, and COVID from a marketplace point of view, COVID threw us all into an Amazon ordering things world. And then when COVID finished, we went from an Amazon ordering things world back into a services and travel and holidays world. And that's thrown massive volatility into the supply chain, which has caused us real challenges as an industry to respond to that. But again, digital is the way forward when it comes to being able to respond to those things in a more flexible and agile way. So the world is changing, and I think digital and Industry 4.0 is you're either on the train or the train has left the station at a certain point.
Yeah, and Erik, I mean, in your experience, how has the manufacturing industry changed over the years? But kind of a second part to that question, why is this important to this discussion we're having?
Well, how has manufacturing changed over the years? You know, frankly, I don't think it has changed a lot over the last 20, 30 years. And it's shocking to me that it hasn't. So like, let's take, for example, like the rest of the world has changed. The internet happened, you know, you have Google, you have all these companies have come up that have like redefined how we interact with each other and how we interact with the world around us. I don't know how to get a ride when I land in a new city. I literally don't know how to get a taxi if I don't have my phone and I click a button and then the car shows up. You know, I can't manage my personal finances without my phone. All of my banking is online. You know, I don't think of myself as a bank teller, but this is just how I interact with the world around me. This is how I communicate with my family. This is, you know, so on and so forth. So my point is that the world already changed. Now, if you contrast that with the state of most manufacturing operations, frankly, it feels a little bit like stepping back in time in a lot of regards. And now I completely agree with Doug's point, by the way. You know, first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolution are upon us, and you know, so I agree with the points that he's making. But I want to talk a little bit about, you know, we're in a situation right now where the majority of operations today, you know, you'll go from having this supercomputer that's connected with every piece of information that exists in the world in your pocket, and then you'll step into a manufacturing environment and you'll have a complex data problem to solve. You'll put your supercomputer away and you'll pick up a pen and paper and you'll start, you know, crunching numbers. You'll whip out your calculator. Sometimes you'll use stopwatches. It's insane to me, right? And I think like Now, that's not everywhere. You are seeing some companies adopt these technologies and adopt them very well, and you're seeing like order of magnitude productivity gains where this is happening. If and I could reference some from our customer base that are making great use of these capabilities, but that's not the average state of the industry today. If you walk into most manufacturing facilities, you're still going to see paper-based work instructions. You're still going to see quality forms on the shop floor. You're still going to see grease boards with hourly targets. So why is that the case? And I think that like, where is this going and why is this important? Those companies that are not investing in these tools today and do not have a good digital strategy are going to be outcompeted, and it's going to be harder and harder to catch up with the companies that are embracing these technologies, because the opportunity for improvement is so profound that, similar to Doug's point, it makes me laugh. It blows my mind to think that you would run that a chemical manufacturing facility could be run in a world without a DCS. It never even occurred to me, like, how would you even do that? But we're at a similar inflection point when it comes to bringing these same digital tools to the rest of operations.
And if I can answer that, Dan, I'm just aware of the time, but the answer to that is pneumatic PID controllers. I had the honor of actually tuning a pneumatic PID controller in my career, but let's not go there because that shows my age. But to come back to that point, I think that's a great point that you make about having the supercomputer in your pocket, and then you go into control room and put the supercomputer away, and you got to deal with systems that don't speak to each other and multiple data entry, and things like just one example of where you want to use a mobile device, but you've got to go into the control room, plug the thing onto a landline, log on to the thing, open whatever device it is that you want to open, and then you can go out into the field with the thing. Those sorts of things, that's when I think earlier on I said, we need to have solutions that are easy and work for people, and that goes across the whole industry, whether it be robotics, AI, software, data architecture, process control systems, the very same process control systems that are now very much, after all of that time, they're very much invested in open architecture systems and common standards. I mean, right down to the I/O. You can buy a flow meter from whatever manufacturer you want, but ultimately they still adhere to a common standard that all the industry can use. That's where we need to go to with digital, that just like your iPhone, you take your iPhone out of your pocket or your whatever device that you have, and within seconds, the thing is configured, up and running, and you can use it to do tasks, and it's helpful. That's where we need to get together with the whole sort of ecosystem of digital, that solutions are useful and they help people to do work easier, and they're not an encumbrance. And, I referred to high hazard environments. We need to have solutions that are hazardous area rating certified. But if you have a tablet that's the size of a small surfboard and weighs half of a house because it's hazardous area certified, it doesn't help the operator. Those sorts of things from solutions providers and the suppliers of the various different solutions. Just like process control went through many years of establishing the standards so that everybody could use their solutions together. That's where we need to go to, also with the Industry 4.0 solution set.
Great. Thank you, Doug. Gentlemen, I'm conscious of time. We have about 10 minutes and we do have a few questions from the audience. I have one other question that I'd like to ask you. So maybe a little bit of a quick fire answer so we can get into some of the audience questions. But I'd like to just touch on the steps to increase adoption after digital implementation projects. So, Doug, how do you ensure... Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. How do you ensure there's effective adoption of new digital tools?
I think give you the really quick fire answer is keep the music playing long enough. Keep the support until it is well embedded and people have developed ability. So, and knowledge does not necessarily mean ability. As long as people have developed the ability to use the tool and it's really embedded into how they do their work, keep that music playing long enough until you've really got that adoption.
All right. And Erik, what should manufacturers do now to make sure their next digital implementation projects are successful and sustainable?
Very easy. You go to tulip.co, free trial, and give it a shot. And I would say, so that's like everyone should do that. But the other thing I would add is train your workforce in this new reality. Reskill your work, reskill, upskill, folks. We all interact. We're all digital natives at this point, in the sense that we all interact with these tools every day. This is not a foreign concept. And when you talk about how to apply these to the frontline workforce, there's tulip.co/university or university/tulip.co. So we have a whole e-learning platform, Tulip University, that shows you how to employ these tools. Now, it's not. This isn't just a Tulip commercial, but my point is, you need to train your people in how to employ these capabilities to be able to solve problems on the shop floor, and then you need to give them the tools.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to get into some of the questions from the audience before we wrap up. There's a question here from David Silk. Is there a role being identified/clarified for enterprise IT, or is the transformation typically OT driven with a new breed of OT and IT skills for scaling, data ops, governance, cyber service, ownership, operate and maintain? It's not directed at either one of you, but Doug.
So maybe I can take a first stab. 2 comments to make that question. I think looking at Dow as an example, we have established a new sub-function within operations, which is specifically called operations IT OT, which brings those different skill sets together. And many of those topics and functions that you mentioned are within our function. Second point that I think is important is we're increasingly investing into the understanding of skills in the organization, and moving away from traditional fixed job roles to understanding skills and how we manage the skill set in the organization. And in this particular discussion, that's very relevant for the digital world as to what digital skills we need for certain roles, because that's changing. Engineers and operators and activity coordinators, etc., within our operations facilities are going to start to need new skills, and we might coalesce some of those skills into new roles within the work process. So I hope that answers from our side.
Yeah, I first of all, I think that's a great answer, Doug. I would say IT is not going away. It's going to remain very important. I think it is changing. IT doesn't mean you're going to necessarily run a bunch of servers in a closet somewhere. It means, you have great infrastructure tools, AWS, Azure, and so the role of IT is changing. I think there's also very much a blending of IT OT here, to Doug's point, and you're seeing these frontline engineers increasingly take on additional responsibility as it relates to the digital tools that are being employed to support the operation. And by the way, this is already happening. We might not call it, you might not think of a frontline operations engineer as a software applications developer, but you know what they do? They have 1 million Excel folders with macros on them already, being Excel sheets with macros. They have email chains. So the point is, like, these mechanisms for communication are already rampant, and really the question isn't whether or not they need to be fluent in the digital world. The question is, like, what's the best tool to be able to solve these problems?
All right, thanks. Erik, you will like this one. Erik, can you share a customer example of digital implementation? Is there a case study or a customer that you can reference?
Oh man, yeah, of course. We've got a ton, and if you go to our website, you can see a whole bunch of them. One I would mention, Stanley Black & Decker comes to mind. They are rolling Tulip out across about 150 of their facilities here, and a couple of sites, sort of varying maturity with respect to the infrastructure environments in these facilities and with the capabilities of the shop floor, to Doug's point, ability and knowledge of the frontline workers on the shop floor. But some are really quite interesting. There's a site down in Hermosillo, Mexico that has runs their entire operation on Tulip soup to nuts, and they're I think as of yesterday, actually, like 70% of their workforce was Tulip certified. So I mentioned we have Tulip University. So they go in and they are, taking these courses. They're becoming certified. They're becoming comfortable in employing these digital tools. And it started out with basic production tracking. Tulip is their production system. Then that data rolls up into the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 boards that show what are the key issues that we need to be dealing with right now on the shop floor. So in tightening that feedback loop to 0. So the moment it happens, you have visibility into this. That signal can be passed to the person who needs to be aware and take action. And then it expands into these like really interesting creative solutions. So for example, at that site specifically, they had, they were being charged for they have these deliveries and then they would send the trucks back, and they were being fined because the trucks were going back dirty, and they would basically call, and this was like many thousands of dollars every day, and they would call and say, no, we didn't send the truck back dirty, this isn't reasonable. So now they have an application where they come, they unload the truck, they take a picture, it gets logged, and then the truck goes back. And now if the shipping company calls them and says, hey, the truck went back dirty, they just email them a picture and say, no, we don't. Cut that down to 0. And it happened one engineer with an idea, with a problem, with the right tools, solved in less than a day, saving thousands of dollars every day. That's one example. We've got hundreds of customers, each of which have many, many sites. So, but that's one example.
Great, thank you, Erik. I think we can work with Tulip to maybe send out some case studies that you have available to the attendees that are here with us today. There is another question actually from the audience that you could both probably contribute to. When making the move from POC to business scale, are you seeing the key champions and funding coming from ops, IT, OT, Six Sigma transformation, or some other organization? Doug, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think that from our side, we would see that very much coming from the business operations. Obviously, Dow is an organization that's aligned into multiple different business pillars. And so we tend to focus very much in being clear with the funding for those things coming from business. With a few notable exceptions, we talked about the big jigsaw puzzle picture. Some things that are infrastructural in nature need to come from the corporate pot.
All right. I think we have time for one more, Erik. What are the first pains your customers tend to start with in their pilots, and are there things we should do, or are there things we should avoid in the first pilot?
Yeah. Well, what we'll typically do, or if you go, our best practices, what we advise is, you start by making a list of, be aware of the Tulip, understand what the capability is, then walk the shop floor, go to Gemba, make a list of all of the problems that you could solve, would like to solve. And you're going to have a list 1 through N, maybe 20, maybe 40. And then you're going to list them. How impactful to the business would it be if we solve this problem? And then in the next column, you're going to say, how hard would it be to solve this problem? 0 to 10. You're going to go down that list, and then you map these to a quad, on a quad chart, where you basically say, in the top right is the highest impact, easiest problems to solve. This is our low-hanging fruit. In the top left, high impact to the business, but hairier problems to solve. In the bottom right, you're going to have lower impact to the business, but pretty easy to solve these problems. That's a good framework to start thinking about what problems you want to take on first. They vary customer to customer, site to site. Some of the things that we typically see in the top right quadrant, though, are things like work order tracking, work order tracking, defect tracking, quality applications, things like this usually fall in. Sometimes it's machine monitoring, downtime reasons. That stuff usually falls in that top right category.
All right. A good note to end on. Gentlemen, this has been really, really interesting. Doug, thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights. And you, Erik,
Thank you, guys.
It's been some slightly different perspectives, but actually made a super interesting conversation, some great questions and comments. We haven't been able to get through them all, which is actually a good thing, but we will follow up with a post-webinar email to all of the attendees with some info about how they can reach out to you both. But that's it from me. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today, and we look forward to catching up with you all again very, very soon. Cheers.